Good morning, I'm harleysch from the LaRouche organization with your daily video update for July 25th, 2024. Today I'm going to be speaking about the road to peace passing through Beijing. The war hawks were gathered yesterday in the U.S. Congress to be briefed by Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, who offered a defense of his policy of genocide in Gaza and at the same time issued a call for a preparation for war against Iran. A little bit later, President Joe Biden gave a talk. He was actually giving his self-congratulatory homage in which he talked about how he has intervened to save the world from the effects of COVID, from the Russian attacks, and basically, he presented his Orwellian war is peace commitment as he and Netanyahu combined for an expression of the mission that the West must have a permanent warfare policy to stop any alternative from coming to the fore. They never talk about what the alternative is. They never talk about why they have to do this. Netanyahu has this mythology of Islamic terrorism and in fact ignores the plight of the Palestinians who have suffered under the Israeli occupation. So let's take a look first at what the war hawks are doing, and then we'll take a look at what the Chinese are doing, which is absolutely fascinating and appears to be very effective. Netanyahu told the Congress there's no alternative to victory over evil, and evil are the Palestinians backed by Iran. He accused those people who oppose his policy of being anti-Semitic and being pro-Hamas and pro-terrorist. He denounced the charges of genocide against Israel, saying that this is just a support for terrorism, and that he said it's directed from Iran. What he said, and this is his quote, "We are fighting Iran. We are protecting you when we fight Iran." What about the tens of thousands of children who have been killed or are missing in Gaza? Is that fighting Iran? Now, he basically says that this is the fault of Hamas, not the result of indiscriminate bombing, which is facilitated by the United States, and which he appealed to the Congress to keep the weapons coming. So that's what Netanyahu had to say yesterday. Then, after he spoke, you had Biden. And Biden justified his decision to leave the presidential campaign by saying he's now passing the torch to a new generation. Well, this is a generation which doesn't seem to be supporting his policies. The youth of the United States were marching in the streets, taking over campuses in the spring in protest of Biden's support for Netanyahu's policy. He had nothing to say about that. Nor did he say anything about the real reason why he left, which is that the donor class, the billionaires, cut his campaign off from any further funds, and basically did so because their fear was that he can no longer carry out the tasks they've assigned to him, which includes preparing global NATO to go to war against China. Now, what is it that China's doing that would lead to the decision to prepare for war with them? China's not about to invade Taiwan. They have time on their side. They believe that their economy is successful enough that it will appeal to the people of Taiwan for full incorporation into China. And that, of course, is the agreed position of most of the world, that it's, including the United States, that there is a one China, which includes Taiwan. So what's the great threat from China? The Chinese are committed to engagement, to diplomacy. They have a win-win approach to these strategic crises in the world. And it's based on the idea that the Chinese, through their economic policy, through the development of new technologies, the increase in productivity, that they've achieved an economic basis for which they can bring other countries into their prosperity. That's what the Belt and Road Initiative is all about. And now on top of that, they have a diplomatic offensive. So over the last few days, they had visitors from Ukraine and from Palestine. On July 23rd, Ukrainian Foreign Minister Kuleba was in Beijing. And he said Ukraine has studied China's proposal, which is a Chinese-Brazilian peace proposal. And Kuleba said Ukraine is ready and willing to engage in dialogue and negotiation with Russia. Well, this is a significant shift, because previously Ukraine said they would not negotiate with Russia as long as Putin is there. Meanwhile, Cardinal Parolin from the Vatican was in Kyiv, and he met with Zelensky. And Zelensky said, "We understand we must finish this war as soon as possible and stop the killing." Now, is it possible that the Ukrainians have reflected on the fact that they made a mistake in April 2022 when they listened to Boris Johnson, who told them on behalf of NATO that they must not sign this agreement with Russia, this peace agreement with Russia? And if they don't sign it, they will be given arms and money. If they do sign it, they'll be cut off. Well, Boris Johnson apparently convinced Zelensky to stay in the war, and now hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians are dead because of that. So is it possible now that Ukraine is going to break with the Biden policy? And the Biden NATO policy is fight to the last Ukrainian for the purposes of weakening Russia. Well, Russia hasn't been weakened. Russia has been strengthened. In the meantime, NATO and the US have been increasingly isolated. Now, then we have a look at what happened with the Palestinians. And there were representatives from the two main resistance movements of Palestine, Hamas and Fatah, but also 12 other Palestinian groups. And they met with Wang Yi, the foreign minister, who also was the one who met with Kuleba. And they came out with a Beijing declaration of unified commitment to a Palestinian nation, with a number of specific aspects to it, but primarily ending the war with Israel, having a ceasefire, and then working together to build a nation, a Palestinian nation, unified, with the ability to provide its own security without an Israeli occupation. And the end of the occupation is key, because as we now know, the International Court of Justice has issued a ruling that the occupation by Israel of Palestinian territory is a violation of international law, it's unlawful, and it must stop. The Palestinians also said they would accept a security agreement with Israel, which is important. The possibility of peace comes from that. But the key, both in the Ukraine and the Palestinian situation, is that working with China has the possibility of an economic outcome. That is, the extension of the Belt and Road Initiative into Europe and into the Southwest Asia, which would be necessary for rebuilding. The West is not going to rebuild Ukraine or Gaza. The rebuilding of Gaza would be resorts for the super wealthy. As for Ukraine, it would be the looting by BlackRock, Vanguard, and others. But the Chinese come in and say, we'll help you rebuild your country. And this was the basis of the alliance or the rapprochement signed between the Saudis and the Iranians, now between the Palestinian groups, and possibly now Ukraine coming into a Chinese-oriented diplomatic solution. So with China and the BRICS, there's a path to peace. With Netanyahu and Biden, permanent war. And if you think Kamala Harris is any different from Biden, I've seen no indication of that yet. And I don't think there will be. I think they wanted a younger person to prosecute the war and to keep it going. So we now have a potential for sustainable peace and development. That's the promise that's come from these meetings, as opposed to the permanent war that Netanyahu and Biden were being cheered for yesterday in Washington. Now, tomorrow's Friday. I'll take your questions. Send them to me at harleysch@gmail.com. And in the meantime, I've attached the video of the webcast dialogue I did with Helga yesterday, where she went through in some detail these developments. So take a look at that, and I'll see you tomorrow.
The big question, what can we do about it? If we have the power to influence the course of history as individuals, then each of us has a corresponding moral responsibility to muster from within ourselves those capacities which enable us to do our part in shaping the course of civilization. Now, under that rubric, I say, what kind of news is newsworthy? The only news that's worth having is news which performs those functions, which enables government, which enables you as an individual and so forth, better to understand what is happening to this planet, to understand what the developments are that are shaping the course of history, and finally to indicate to you the facts which you need to look at so that you can judge what it is that you might be able to do which can contribute to bringing about a solution, an escape from the collapse of civilization. This is no pipe dream, this is no fantasy, this is real.